The first case I saw was physical abuse, but I think these days we're seeing a lot more financial abuse. But it covers the whole spectrum. We've got psychological abuse where people are threatened. We've got sexual abuse, which varies from, well, goes from rape right through to forced viewing of pornographic literature. It's not so common, but it certainly happens. And then neglect, which is simply the failure of a caregiver to provide the necessities of life to an older person. And we had a case in the Coroner's Court late last year of a lady who was found 3 months after her death by the real estate agent in her home. Her daughter had been providing care for her.
I'm interested in that issue of financial abuse and the way that money can be withheld, used as a form of control, but it can also clearly, in the cases of elderly people, perhaps people with cognitive issues, the carer might think they're doing the right thing, not by stealing, but by managing, looking after the money.
That can certainly happen. I think the majority of the abuse we see, though, is misuse of, say, powers of attorney, where a mother in all good faith gives her son a power of attorney. He then uses it without telling her how he's using it, and suddenly she finds she no longer owns her own home. She no longer has her interest-bearing deposits. And it's a case quite often of, it's going to be mine one day, but gee, I'd like it now.
So I'm interested in that justification, the fact that this is not a conscious criminal act necessarily, or indeed in the case of carers who end up physically abusing a parent. How much of that is something that we should be sympathetic towards in terms of their level of frustration or the stress that they're under as a carer, as opposed to they're just beating up an old person?
The stress that must occur within a caring relationship is huge, and I should emphasise that the majority of carers don't abuse. But if you're in a situation where you're looking after someone with dementia who even forgets who you are, sometimes you get annoyed, you might want to push them in the shower, you might want to grab them. That sort of stress is entirely understandable, and we shouldn't look at an abuser, we should look at two victims, because clearly that's the situation.
Is that an argument against mandatory reporting? Because we do have some saying that, you know, too much of this is going unreported. We have to change that.
If you ask older people what they want, and we have a number of times, they will tell you they do not want mandatory reporting. We already have it for those most vulnerable people in nursing homes, for physical assault and sexual assault. That's already in place. But for the majority of older people in the community, they don't want mandatory reporting. They're ashamed quite often that this has happened, that their children have abused them. And that's a problem. That's why it's hidden, because they won't report it.
And is there a certain amount of excuses made even for, you know, community carers, for instance, that might take $10 out of the housekeeping if they've been sent up the shops or something, that, oh, well, you know, they do such a great job, they're so lovely, etc., that there is this sort of inappropriate level of forgiveness?
And certainly people will often say, here, take an extra $10 for your trouble. When that becomes an extra $100, then you're looking at real, I guess, exploitation. The issue is we talk about elder abuse as any pattern of behaviour that causes harm to an older person. If taking $10 doesn't cause harm but keeps that relationship going, then in a way that's not really abuse. But if it's, you know, the $100 that then leaves them short, that's quite different.
I'm interested in the panel's thoughts on this, because, Jane, obviously this is it's an awful thing to think about, that this could be your parents or grandparents being mistreated by a loved one or by a professional in a home.
Hey, I'm about to have a grandchild. Could be me.
Yeah, right. But, I mean, it's something that could be, it could be a part of all of our lives at some point. How do we raise awareness without making the problem worse?
Well, I think we have to raise awareness, and I think it's really good that we are talking about this. And I like the way you're sympathetic towards the carers who are, in fact, probably completely overwhelmed, exhausted, not getting enough support, not getting enough respite from their caring duties, and so it is two victims. I think financial abuse is an entirely different thing. That is a form of theft, and I'm actually getting quite a lot of contact from people in the public who just contact me out of the blue and say, this is going on, can you raise awareness of it? People need to be alerted to it. So I don't think raising awareness is a bad thing, and I also think it helps older people and people who are getting towards being older people like me, think about it in advance and think about the fact that you may end up being very dependent and demented, and God, I hope not, but, you know, these things can happen. And how are you going to also preemptively protect yourself and be sensible too. So I think it's great.
We are just about out of time, but is
Sorry.
there any way, Susan, to insulate yourself from this? Is it just about awareness, or is there more can be done?
I think it's really important that all older people have enduring power of attorney and enduring guardianship organised with someone they trust, and preferably at least two, because usually it means then two have to collude.
Because people change.
Yes.
And
Interesting
that's
point.
probably one of the biggest things we can do.
Thank you.